Hello everyone! Welcome to our third video in this series about fads from the 1970s, a time when computers were rare, internet didn't exist, and no one ever thought of a phone as being smart. It was an analog world for most of us, when young people filled their free time with hanging out and had to be home when the streetlights came on. If you like this video and want to see more new content in the future, click on subscribe and turn on notifications so that you get a message when a new video is released. So let's spend a few feel-good minutes taking a primo look back at 10 more fads from the 1970s. Platform shoes. Kicking off our first fad is the beloved platform shoe, or sole. These weren't invented in the 1970s. In fact, they've been around in some form or another for centuries. The 1970s just happened to be a time when they strutted their stuff and boogied down as a fashion fad that seemed to pair well with bell-bottoms, rock bands, and disco. The fad was popular with women and men and appeared on shoes, sandals, boots, and even sneakers. Platform shoes were initially available featuring a high, chunky-looking block heel style. But as the decade progressed, the style evolved into thick soles combined with thinner high heels, and even stiletto heels. The more outrageous shoes were one-off custom designs commissioned by rock stars and celebrities, and were just the thing to get your stage costume or Bob Mackie dress noticed and talked about. Although not as widespread a fad these days as it was in the 1970s, you can still buy footwear with platform-type shoes even today. Custom vans. Custom vans were everywhere in the 1970s. These were a party pad that you could use as a mobile base for all the fun 1970s things that one could indulge in. The customization of these vehicles was a natural extension of hot rod culture that started decades earlier. The idea was to take a cargo van, trick out the interior with a bed, refrigerator, and maybe a table, and tie it all together with the best, tasteful 1970s interior decorating trends and become instantly popular with your party friends. The exteriors of the vans oftentimes had body modifications, aftermarket wheels and tires, and were usually painted with custom murals and graphics. There was even a low-budget teen comedy film released mostly to drive-in theaters in 1977 that capitalized on the pulp culture fad titled The Van. Interestingly, a then unknown Danny DeVito makes an appearance in the movie. The fad lasted for most of the 1970s, but seemed to die out toward the end of the decade. The custom van concept evolved in later decades into the multi-passenger extended roof incarnation that could transport passengers in style and comfort. Posters and graphic art. Every decade and era has a look or an aesthetic that is associated with it, and the 1970s brought its A-game in this department. One of these was the smiley face ideogram that appeared on all sorts of products like posters, keychains, and stickers. The smiley face began appearing in the 1960s with an early version applied as a shirt graphic and given away as contest prizes by the WMCA radio station in New York City. Other companies created their own versions of the design, with it finally being legally trademarked in the early 1970s and licensed to appear on merchandise around the globe, which it did. The 1970s also had its iconic graphic art posters that are familiar touchstones for that decade. Mostly everyone recalls seeing or owning a Keep On Truckin' poster that was created by artist R. Crumb. Another popular artist's work that has that 1970s association was that of Peter Max. He became well known in the later 1960s and early 1970s and specialized in vibrant colors containing much or all of the visible spectrum in his work. His artwork is instantly recognizable as pop culture artifacts from the 1970s. Male perms. The men's permed hair craze in the 1970s seemed to spread across the land like disappointment at a Flint Tropics basketball game. It started showing up on musicians and actors in TV shows and movies, and soon salons were perming men's hair everywhere. If you see a photo of a man with a perm, you just know it's from the 1970s. What could have possibly inspired that fad? Maybe it was the late 1960s Broadway musical Hair, or maybe, later in the 70s, it was Mike Brady, or Al Pacino, or Willie Ames, or David Bowie, or George Harrison. Amusingly, there's a fan website dedicated to George Harrison's permed hair, whose motto is, "Permalicious, so delicious." Perhaps it was the combination of them all creating collective perm exposure incrementally over time that reached critical mass of supernova fadness that seemed to all but disappear by the time the 1980s rolled around. Shag carpeting. One of the top decorating fads that people young and old can identify with the 1970s is shag carpet. It was that funky floor covering and sometimes wall covering in those eye-searing 70s colors that went so well with the furniture, appliances, and design trends of the time. The shag theme also spilled over into other 1970s products and trends, like lavatory accessories, the shag hairstyle, and the shag dance. The carpet style has made a comeback in recent years and can still be purchased in rug and carpet versions and make these guys very happy. Magic 8-Ball. This always cool and fun toy is still around today, but in the 1970s is when it really took off and helped many people make important life decisions with its always accurate and never random answers to important questions that were posed to it. The original idea was developed in the 1940s and didn't resemble the 8-ball design we are all familiar with today. Back then it was called the Psycho Slate and was only a liquid-filled cylindrical tube with clear windows on each end, with worded dice inside that would float to the top of the tube when it was turned over. The design was refined and evolved over the years until it was incorporated into the 8-ball we know today, after the Brunswick Billiard Company used it as a popular promotional item giveaway in the 1950s, possibly influenced by a scene from a Three Stooges film from 1940. After the Brunswick promotional contract ended, the 8-ball design was marketed as a paperweight, where it became widely popular with children, and eventually was marketed as a toy. In 1971, the company that produced the Magic 8-Ball was sold to Ideal Toys, who improved the design, ramped up production, sold it worldwide, and made it a common sight in stores everywhere. The Spirit of 76 celebration. Some celebrations last a few hours, maybe a day or a weekend. In the mid-1970s, there was a patriotic celebration era that lasted from around the end of 1974, all the way to July 4th, 1976. These were the celebration events and commemorative products released to pay tribute to the founding of the United States and the 200th anniversary of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence. The Spirit of 76 fad, as it was known, was full throttle evident everywhere in the US, and it seemed every company released some special edition version of whatever products they produce to help us all celebrate. The 18-month-long Hype Fest culminated with a huge celebration in Washington, D.C. and at the Statue of Liberty on the July 4th Sunday in 1976. This day also signaled the end of the bicentennial fad to give everyone a 100-year pause until the next one comes around. Wacky Packages. Wacky Packages, also known as Wacky Packs, were packages of trading cards and stickers marketed to children in the late 1960s and 1970s. They featured comical, artistic, illustrated parodies of well-known consumer-branded products. The packages included 2 cards, a checklist card, and a stick of rock-hard bubblegum, only to be chewed in times of complete desperation. The sticker designs became extremely popular and outsold baseball cards in 1973 and 1974, elevating Wacky Packs to full-on fad status. These were very entertaining to read and collect, and resembled the irreverent tone of Mad Magazine, with some of the same artists providing the artwork for the Wacky Pack parodies. However, some of the companies whose products were the subject of the parody cards were not amused, and sent cease and desist letters to Topps Inc., the producer of the cards. This resulted in many of the cards being pulled from production and turning them into sought-after collector's items. Lawn darts. These backyard recreation products were a fun way to entertain yourself and a group of friends in the 1970s. The concept was simple. With skill, sobriety, and accuracy, one would toss the weighted dart into the air and attempt to pierce the soil within a plastic ring located on the ground, off in the distance somewhere, and keep score of the results. You would win if you got the most points, and least injuries. Although fun, they weren't the safest products ever sold to the public. As early as 1970, the FDA began requiring all lawn dart packaging to include warnings that the product was not to be used by children and were not to be marketed as toys due to the injury potential. Lawn darts with pointed tips are now outlawed in both the US and Canada, but you can still get a similar design with weighted plastic tips. Roller skating. What more 1970s could this fad be? Images and footage of sun-kissed, tube sock wearing roller skaters showing off their moves on the Venice Beach Promenade or in roller discos across the country are instantly recognizable as on brand for the 1970s era. There were movies, TV shows, and music released around the latter part of the 70s that capitalized on the roller disco craze. Roller skating will always be with us, but for a few funky moments in the 1970s, pop culture gave us this totally cool and copacetic fad that took the country by storm. Well, that's all for this look at more fads from the 1970s. When a peanut farmer was president, blue light specials were a thing, and a guy named Chico let us know when things in his world were looking good. If you were there, you might remember these fondly, and even indulged in some yourself. If you weren't there, this was a glimpse into all the fun, silly, weird, and cool things that folks in the 1970s were into and made a part of their lives for a short while. There are still lots more fads, trends, and cool things from the 70s that we haven't gotten to yet, but watch this channel for an upcoming part 4 of even more fads from the 1970s.